Good morning, everybody. My name is Manuk. Thank you so much for checking out my podcast. This is, of course, the pilot episode titled The Homeless Landlord. I am technically a Syrian-born Armenian American. I say technically because we came to the US when I was 8 months old. We are Syrian Armenian because of the Armenian genocide that happened in 1915, and a lot of Armenians fled the country, and our people settled in various surrounding countries to escape the war, to escape the genocide, including Turkey, Lebanon, Syria, Iran. So my great-grandparents originally settled in Syria, and we came here for a better life. But I only identify as Armenian American, or as an Armenian and as an American. Essentially raised in Philly my whole life, and I discovered travel about 6 years ago. And I started by road tripping the continental US for 9 months. That's the lower 48 states. And I took an SUV and I slept in the back. I had a queen size mattress in the back of an SUV. Super comfortable setup. And I visited the state capitol buildings, all the large cities, a bunch of national parks, quirky roadside attractions, you name it, I tried to do it. And then when I came back after 9 months, I started April Fool's Day and I ended on Christmas Eve. Not on purpose, sort of on purpose, more towards the end of the trip, which is when I tried to plan to get back home and surprise my mom for Christmas. And it was the sweetest moment of both of our lives. But in any event, I did that for 9 months, and I caught the travel bug. So I came back, and this is when the COVID-19 pandemic arrived. So I got back December of 2019, and the pandemic hit a few months later. And once travel slowly started opening back up, I flew out to Alaska and Hawaii, and I added Puerto Rico just to finish the 50 states. And it was actually at that time when I realized, okay, now I want to try to get to every country. Yeah, definitely not the first to make this attempt. Definitely not the first to do. I mean, there are many people who have visited every country. And by many, I think at this current time in 2024, I think there are approximately 250 documented, but many more undocumented. Undocumented immigrants. No, just kidding. Undocumented people who have been to every country. And I kind of wanted to make a podcast to talk about it from my perspective because, so to continue the story a bit, the pandemic hit, I finished the 50 states, and then I think my first international solo trip was to Jamaica, if we're not including Canada. So at this point, technically I had been to, before Jamaica, technically I'd been to 3 countries, which was Syria, my place of birth. Although we did go back when I was 6 years old for 2 months, and I do remember most of that trip. So I am counting it. Doesn't mean I'm not going back to Syria. I have lots of family in Syria, but so Syria, the U.S. and Canada, because we would make road trips to Canada growing up many times. We have cousins in Canada. So the U.S., Canada, Syria, and Jamaica was technically my fourth country, but my first international solo trip. And since then, that was 5 years ago, 4 years ago. Wait, no, 3 years ago. Because that was late 2021. It hasn't even been 3 years, actually. So a little less than 3 years ago. And since then, I've been to 59 countries, most of them in the West and in Europe. So in the West, there are technically 37 I'm sorry, 35 UN recognized countries. 23 of them are in North America. 12 of them are in South America. So out of the 35, I've been to 31. I am missing Haiti, which is not the place to go right now. I'm missing Venezuela, which is also a bit tricky for Americans. And I'm missing Peru and Chile, which I will absolutely go to soon. And then Europe. Europe, I've covered maybe a little less than half. And this podcast is launching during my indefinite timeline trip around the world. I bought a one-way ticket to Morocco, and I'll be flying out November 5th, election day here in 2024 in the US, coincidentally. And I have no timetable on my return. And some of the things I would love to talk about on this podcast throughout the episodes are how I'm doing it, why I'm doing it. I'll touch briefly on how. So I am indeed a landlord, which is another reason I wanted to start doing this, because as I've traveled, I've met many travelers. Any traveler will meet travelers, period. That will happen. But most of this traveling styles that I meet, or I should say most of the nomads that I meet, or those who are, they might not necessarily be solo travelers, but they're traveling on a budget, traveling in hostels. They're they're not staying at resorts. So most of these travelers that I meet source their income from one of two ways. One, they are remote workers, which is obviously the way to do it. Well, I suppose one of three ways. So either A, remote working. So obviously if you have a marketable skill that allows you to remote work, that's probably the ideal way to do it. The second most common way are people who have simply just saved a lot of money and have quit their jobs. You see this often. You see it from younger travelers and older travelers. Now that kind of goes hand in hand with people who have come across a lump sum of money and have decided to travel with it, whether it's an inheritance or they won something or they earned something. It could even be like a lawsuit settlement. It could be anything, but just the philosophy of it is, hey, I just ran across a bunch of money. I'm going to travel. I'm not working. I'm just going to travel. And the third one would simply be somebody who's taken off for like a couple of weeks, or they're in between, like they just graduated college and they have a month before they want to start working, so they're backpacking Europe, or they are not in between jobs, sorry, but they're on vacation from work. Whatever the case is, these are the most common situations, right? And then here I come, where I am a landlord, and I'm traveling with passive income. Now, I realize first and foremost how fortunate I am to be able to travel this way for a number of reasons, but mostly because the financial security is always going to be there. Not necessarily always. Actually, no. Believe it or not, that's actually not how I think, because once I start thinking that way, then you tend to get comfortable and you say, okay, I'm good. I don't care what happens. And then that's when you lose control of your finances. But that's actually, yeah, let's scratch that. We'll keep that in there. We're not going to edit this. So, yeah, so I have rental properties in the Philly area, and that I'm lucky to have gotten them at a good time. I've had a great agent who's become a friend over the years. I am a landlord. I have passive income, and I travel with the income coming in, and I do like some management while I'm traveling, especially now that I have a good team of help back home with the properties. But in any event, so this podcast, I want to share, of course, travel tips, travel experiences, and how and why I'm sort of doing what I'm doing, and hoping you guys are interested enough to follow me along and be like, all right, where's this dude at? Let's check in. What country number is he at? Because again, I'm not. There are many others before me who have done so. I follow a few of them. I'm big fans of them. Um, and also another thing I would love to do eventually with this podcast is to get some guests on here, some hand-picked select guests. Well, yeah, so they would the guests I would want on here are one of two types of people, maybe more, but um, predominantly travelers, of course, those who have been to more countries than I have, those who can share travel tips, maybe travel influencers, hopefully, that I can collaborate with. And the other one, some locals of countries that I'm visiting that I think uh, are fascinating and captivating people that I run across, which happens all the time with travel. You know, the locals are my favorite people to meet while traveling. You know, I love meeting other travelers and sharing stories, sharing experiences, especially as a solo traveler, because sometimes it does get lonely out there. That is also a great episode. I would I plan to dive into eventually, but meeting locals are absolutely my favorite. You know, taking local buses, local transport, um, kicking it with just being one of the people of wherever you are is part of the experience, I think, in nomad and solo traveling and budget traveling even. And so yeah, so getting on some captivating locals to discuss their lives and the situation in their country, and you know, maybe there are some locals who are travelers who have some things to share. These are the things I really want to talk about on this podcast, and hopefully it's entertaining. Hopefully I keep you guys entertained. I'm aiming to do one a week on average. I would love to get a schedule going. I don't see why I shouldn't be able to do so because I will be obviously staying at hotels and Airbnb. Well, when I say hotels, I mean hostels and like booking.com, like shared like guest houses, and not like hotels like you're thinking, not Sheratons. Not that I obviously look, I'm not there's a mindset you have as a nomad traveler, budget traveler, and it's that even if you have the means to do it, you don't have to, and you shouldn't. You shouldn't. I think you shouldn't. If you're if you're longing for this lifestyle, I think you have to be willing to sacrifice a lot of the luxuries you are used to. And I mean, I'm mostly speaking to Americans when I say that, and Europeans, and other places, of course. There's Asia. I mean, all right. Let's just say I'm talking to the world. I'm talking to people who are used to not necessarily luxury, but used to comfort. Um, and this includes like local buses, sleeping at airports every now and then, walking around with a backpack and a sleeping bag perhaps, or a hammock like I ran into one lady once. Polish lady in her 50s, or amazing. She carries a hammock with her. That's right. All she needs is two trees and she is good. So if you are planning to or are interested in living this lifestyle, you have to be, because if I'm spending 150 to 200 a night on a hotel, what money am I leaving behind for the next country or to reinvest in? Because there are two things in my mind as a homeless landlord. There are two things that I'm focusing on, right? A, getting to the next country, right? That's the homeless aspect, right? The fact that I'm floating around to different countries and staying in different places. And to the landlord aspect, which is sure, I want to continue to invest, or at least have the option to continue investing if I decide to do so during this trip or after this trip. And when I say this trip, I don't. I'm also well aware that I don't. I have no realistic expectations of visiting every country in one shot in this trip. Um, it's very complicated with many for many reasons. Particularly because right now the condition of many countries are just not not only unsafe but also not actually possible to get into, or very difficult to get into. Impossible to get to obviously is North Korea, and I know there are many people that are counting every passport stamp that are waiting for North Korea to open to cross the finish line. So North Korea is the first that comes to mind, but there are countries like Iran who require a private tour guide that's very expensive. So, there are, and that's just, again, there are many more than just those two, but to finish them all in one trip is unrealistic, but the goal is to get to as many as I can before I say I'm burnt out or I'm simply just ready to take a break. Sitting at 59, there are 136 left that are official UN recognized countries. So if in my head I have like this sort of average per week slash month slash year, if I take all the countries and I factor in if I take into consideration the fact that countries they vary in size, huge countries, small countries, and some of these countries are not touristy countries at all. Let's compare a country like Togo in Africa to a country like Brazil, right? You're not going to spend the same amount of time in both countries. So if I take into consideration everything and I leave room for error, for extra travel time, and being extra super conservative, I'm approximating 1 week per country. If I'm being super conservative on how much money I would spend, using those same factors, I am approximating $500 per country. So, with these two things in mind, right? Understanding that some countries might only cost me $250, some countries might cost me $1,500, probably more than that. Understanding that some countries I'll only be in for 2 to 3 days, some countries I'll be in for 2 to 3 weeks. 1 week per, 500 per is the average. So we're looking at, obviously so there's 195 official UN countries recognized. Let's just round it off to 200. At 200 countries at $500 per average, and I'm looking at this based on my history of spending, maybe a little bit more. And the only reason it's a little bit more is because there've consistently been flights back home. So we're sort of eliminating that, and we're sort of traveling, especially with bordering countries, we're traveling more by car and by bus, and we're eliminating the need for those $500-600 airplane tickets, which, by the way, a lot of times are covered by miles, which goes into the equation at $500 per country. So basing it off of that, you're looking at approximately 100 grand to visit every country. Not an unrealistic number if you travel the way I and others do. Things that I, again, will certainly be diving into in various episodes about how to keep that number low. And we're looking at 4 years, right? Again, this is all just rounding off. 52 weeks a year times 4, let's just say 50-ish times 4 is 200-ish, right? $500 a week, $500 a country times 500-ish per country times 200-ish countries is 100,000-ish. Now, some of you are listening and saying $100,000 is a lot of money. Guess what? It is a lot of money. Of course. And I don't mean to downplay $100,000 because I don't. And by the way, it probably does surpass $100,000 by a little bit. But the objective is to try our best to stay at those numbers if we're looking to accomplish this at a reasonable rate, at a rate to which you're not spending your entire life chasing this dream. There's a Facebook group called Every Passport Stamp with currently 19,000 members who are attempting to do this, many of which are much further. By the way, I am a newbie. Okay, I am I'm a new human to traveling. 59 countries is nothing in the world of global travel, especially in the world of people who are attempting to visit every country. I'm approximately 1/3. Now, I'm also not downplaying 59 countries. I understand that it's, plus 50 states. We gotta include that, right? I look at my last 5 years and say, wow, before this trip, I've been nowhere. And now I've been to 109 different territories. Sort of. I still think it's only 59 countries. But, and actually more territories because, again, Puerto Rico, Aruba, which is a Dutch territory, Curacao. But in any event, So I don't mean to downplay. I'm not trying to down or overplay. I'm just trying I'm just trying to play. I'm just trying to play, and I want you to play along, right? That's kind of cool. I'm gonna try to use something. Anyway, let's move on. But so yeah, it's not a ton in the grand scheme of things, and I understand where I'm at. I understand that I have a long way to go, and I understand that there are many very challenging countries that I have yet to tap into. It is not going to be easy. This is not going to be. It's also why I want to start. It's another reason I want to start a podcast. I want you guys to be like, yo, keep going, right? Like I'm looking. It's not that I'm necessarily looking to influence. I would love to, right? I absolutely do not consider myself, and never would want to consider myself an influencer, right? I also would not consider myself an entrepreneur. Those are two words that just make my they just make my nose hairs want to rip themselves off and walk away, which is great because I would rather not have nose hairs. But um, even though I definitely consider myself self-employed, um, but I understand there are many challenging places that are going to suck and that I know nothing. I am a dumb dude. I'm a dumb guy just going about. And now I obviously research like crazy. And that's another episode, I think, a full episode where I talk into all the different resources of and all the different methods of research you can do out there. There's so many, and how to sort of vent between the good and the bad, because there are, just like anything else, there are a whole bunch of naysayers in the world of travel. The number one that I found being, don't go to that country or that city, you're an idiot, do you really want to get killed, right? Like you see that on across so many different cities and threads about certain places. It's tiring, it's exhausting. Well, about specific places that are not necessarily the case. Like people might be speaking off of one experience, or people might be speaking only simply from their local lens, which of course is important. But and if I'm coughing, by the way, I have a sinus infection that's been lingering for a couple of weeks since I got back from Scotland, but um, it's towards the tail end of it. But anyway, so yeah, I understand where I'm at. I understand it's going to be long, and I might not make it. I might not make it. Now, in my head, and I'm sure in many other travelers' head who are checking off every country, in my head, it's 195 or bust. So what does that mean? Does that mean if I made it to 194 and I can't get to the last that I failed? No. It simply means that I need to get to all. It's like, all right, not to bring up Togo again, but it's like, if I'm not going to make it to 195, why the hell did I spend money to get to Togo? Like, that's the weird way my mind thinks. It's like, I could have just gone to Paris and London and Rome and South Africa and you know, the destinations that people want to go to and call it a day. So if I'm going to some of these other countries, Burkina Faso, right, level 4, do not travel by the U.S. government, probably by other governments, right? There are the civil war, like other countries. Why would I ever go there if I didn't intend to go to every country? Um, so you know, again, understanding that it might not be done in one trip, but the lifelong goal, the intent with this podcast and this trip is to get to as many countries as I can without having to come back. And I'm pretty sure, I'm confident that I can get pretty far along. I'm confident that I can get deep into the 100s. I don't know how high into the 100s. I don't know how high, but I think I can blow past 100 no problem on this trip. And yeah, I just want to keep going as long as I can. And if I have to tap out, then I will continue at one point. And I'll try to keep up with the podcast as well if it comes to that, for sure. You know, if I'm doing more of the landlording portion of it and less of the homeless portion of it in the meantime. But in any event, this will be a long journey, and I really hope to have you guys along with me. I think that's good right now. I think it's good where we're at. I think I've covered the bases on. I think I've covered the general idea of some of the things I would like to talk about on this podcast. I hope you find me interesting and entertaining enough. I hope to increase the level of entertainment by like a decibel per episode. I don't know if there's a decibel measurement per entertainment me. All right, just stop, dude. Just listen to what you're saying. But I hope to keep you guys entertained. If you did like this podcast, please share it on your Instagram, social media. Right now, I'm predominantly mostly just using Instagram for my travel blogging, and my stories are where you'll find most of the juice. And my Instagram is Nukeyhove, Nukeyhov. You can also DM me there if you want to share some stories. And my WhatsApp is +1 215. So you can reach out to me there. That's really, I'm not really, no, that's it. Let's just stick to those for now. If something else bigger and better comes along, great. But I really hope you've enjoyed this podcast. I'm very much looking forward to sharing travel experiences and stories, and hopefully I can share some things that are practical for those who are listening, and things that are entertaining for those who are listening as well. And with that, I will leave you guys and bid you farewell.